Yes, indeed. It is called Lothric, where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge.
Hello there. Welcome to a detailed look at Dark Souls 3. A dive into the kingdom of Lothric from the emergence of the Ashen One to their final decision at the very end. I'm going to be breaking this game down into a series of chapters, starting with the beginning, the story, exploration, combat, bosses and enemies, music and setting, and finally, I'm going to be breaking down each ending and a culmination and conclusion. I'd like to preface the guts of the video by establishing a few notes to take into account as you watch. If you've discovered my channel, you'll notice that it is relatively new. Because of this, I am doing my best to produce a full-time project with the time that I have available. Though I am not new to YouTube and editing, I have done this before, only briefly on an older channel. I am kind of starting fresh here. Any critique is more than welcome, and I hope you take the time to listen. If you wind up enjoying the video, please consider leaving a comment, a like, or even consider subscribing for future content similar to this. I am trying to get this out before the release of Elden Ring, and I do intend to cover that game as well, so stay tuned for that. On the subject of Dark Souls and why I consider myself to be someone who can discuss this game. I have played each Souls game at length, but Dark Souls 3 is certainly the Souls game I've spent most of my time in over the past 5 or so years that it's been out. For this video, I did start brand new, with the intent to engage Lothric slowly and methodically, and have been playing this game pretty much non-stop for the past couple of days, with a handful of breaks. I've also been doing research to discuss this game properly and fairly. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Hi, this is me from the future while editing this video. This is like day 2 of editing, and I don't know what ended up happening, but I pretty much lost all of the footage that I initially had for this part. You'll kind of notice some disconnect here and there, but I wanted to mention that I lost all of my footage up until the Great Hollow boss fight. Now, the thing is, I meant to have some of that in there because of the sections that I've come up with for this video. So because of that, I just kind of have some footage of me playing the game in the background, so I hope you enjoy. Anyway, back to the video. Awake, Ashen One, for the world has need of you. At least, that's what plays through my mind each time I see my character rise during the first cutscene. I'm sure plenty of others, yourself included, may have even felt a similar reaction when first opening the game. Dark Souls 3 begins right after a standard Souls cinematic, showcasing the primary elements to the story. As a quick note, Dark Souls 1 opens with a more detailed explanation through its visuals and dialogue as to why the world is the way it is. Dark Souls 3, however, opens with an immediate mission. Find these Lords of Cinder and kill them. Although it's certainly not that simple in the end, that should end up being reserved for the story section. After you get your bearings and begin moving your character around, you're met with a simple introduction zone to teach the player some basic gameplay elements. This is not uncommon for a Souls game, but Dark Souls 3 pushes you right into the action. You gather your gear, explore briefly, only to meet the first boss fight only a few minutes in. Despite boss fights not being new to almost anybody who plays video games, Gundyr provides an interesting and challenging experience to entice the player. This stone soldier, kneeling with a coiled sword in his chest, will attack the Ashen One after he or she pulls the blade from his body. Gundir's initial phase is simplistic enough to overcome. Large, sweeping attacks make it easy for the player to understand their methods to survive a fight. Dodging or blocking, or parrying for a more skilled player. However, his second phase is immediately explosive as he transforms into this gooey, slimy, serpent-like creature. I'm going to pause this right here already. Something that engaged me personally is this very mechanic. Nobody really expects it, and it immediately increases the challenge of the fight, making an encounter like this more satisfying once you beat him. When the Ashen One awakens, he or she is the weakest piece on the chessboard. Everyone else, the bosses we encounter particularly, are naturally stronger than we are. They're larger in scale and have much stronger attacks, forcing the player to run around wildly and play defensively during a fight. Gundyr is no different, and you, the player, the Ashen One, after slaying your first obstacle, begin in this world. It's a combat-focused way to suggest that you have a destiny, and it begins right here. After defeating Gundyr, you travel forward before discovering the Firelink Shrine. The surrounding area is warm and welcoming, comforting. And as the soundtrack crescendos with spirit, you realize this is home. The Ashen One proceeds to embed the coiled sword into the bonfire pit, allowing it to light and officially claiming this spot as a place of respite for you and others. After doing so, most players will find themselves speaking with the woman closest to the fire, a firekeeper. This firekeeper is practically the only character who cares about you and your success through gathering the Lords of Cinder and bringing them back to their thrones. The calmest woman in the lands, and she chooses you. And you subsequently choose her as your closest ally. She helps to maintain the shrine so that you always feel home there. It goes without saying, but Dark Souls 3 is front-loaded with content that grasps the player's attention by being both familiar and yet somehow still unique to the game. The story throughout the series has eluded many fans along the way. I'm not sure if I would personally describe Dark Souls 3's story as fine and detailed or convoluted and irrelevant. It's no secret, however, that From Software appreciates the concept of read between the lines, encouraging players to literally read their item descriptions and loading screen elements in order to discover the finer details of the story. As an example, reading the item description for the Dark Moon Longbow ability, the player will discover that Aldrich actually ate Gwendolyn, who had originated in Anor Londo with his family from the very first game. Although there is some speculation on whether or not that this is the same Anor Londo, this still suggests that the previous games are, in fact, intertwined. Nowadays, that's a given based on how long the Souls series has been around, but back then, during the initial release of Dark Souls 3, I remember there being quite some confusion as to why Aldrich looked like Gwendolyn, especially because he appears as rotten sludge from the opening trailer. The hammer associated with Smo indicates that he was the final knight to be defending Anor Londo, which suggests that Ornstein was slain first by the chosen undead from Dark Souls 1. The Hollow Slayer Greatsword implies that Lucatiel from Dark Souls 2 was actually eaten by the tree that we face in the Undead Settlement. I could go on for hours about item descriptions, but these are small bits of the story that are more or less nods to certain aspects of the lore and don't delve into the main plot. So I pulled off of the wiki page for Dark Souls 3 and interpreted the story for a reading. This is what I came up with. As the undead continue to vanquish themselves in order to maintain the Age of Fire, many more are birthed through the curse of undeath. Notably, all undead will eventually go hollow, unless they are turned to cinder when linking the first flame. All kingdoms are impacted by the relinking of the first flame, and by bringing the Age of Darkness as well. The world is physically shred apart around all living or non-living beings due to the world constantly being reshaped and reset. It is theorized that you, an unkindled one, had once linked the first flame, which is why you are not a hollow, but a cinder. Rising once again, you eliminate those who would hide from the first flame, the other Lords of Cinder. There are 5. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, Farron's Undead Legion, the Abyss Watchers, the reclusive Lord of the profaned capital, Yorm the Giant, Holy King Lothric, last hope of his line, and Ludleth, the Exiled. Ludleth remains on his throne, awaiting his fellow lords to return, so that the first fire may be linked once again. During the progression of the story, the Ashen One discovers the horrors that have been bestowed upon the world due to the constant relinking of the first flame. Perhaps the other Lords of Cinder were right to hide. Leave the world like it is now, or risk making it even worse. After gathering the ashes of the Lords of Cinder, you are tasked with defeating the culmination of all Cinder, life imbued within the soul of Cinder, so that you may relink the flame once again. Hopefully this summarizes the story well enough, but I will save the rest for the final chapter of this video. Throughout the world, you'll discover a variety of characters and items while exploring each level. At the Firelink Shrine, each character you meet happens to be familiar to the Souls series as a whole. The Crestfallen Warrior, Blacksmith, and even the primary vendor are each a repurposed character who originates from the first 2 Souls games. If the player explores the shrine further, they'll discover a simple character who also encourages PvP. Invasions. Dark Souls 3 takes after Dark Souls 2 in that it has a hub zone which functions as a staging area for the player. Not much to discover here inside, but at this point the player may not know about the other places around the shrine. The surrounding area hosts a tower guarded by a lone samurai who has forgotten to wear his clothing. Most NPC battles like this have some sense of challenge, so the player is rewarded a weapon and clothing item, as well as a summon to use later on after defeating him. The tower itself has its own little platforming puzzle that can be accessed after purchasing a key. By completing the puzzle, you're rewarded with a few goodies along the way. Within the first few zones, you're able to discover a handful of other characters who will join you at the shrine or present you with a new quest. My personal favorite quest is the Usurpation of Fire questline, allowing the player to actually become a hollow, similar to the previous 2 games, and be granted a unique ending to the storyline. Now, in this playthrough, I did not go for that ending. Because of that, I did let the pilgrim die instead of bringing him back to the shrine, but I have done it multiple times. It's a longer, but very special questline, and I highly encourage you to try it out for yourself. These little beats make Dark Souls 3 a more filled experience. There is no open world with nothing to do. Most of the levels have some sort of character to engage with who is more like you. They aren't hideous, large, or deformed monsters, they're just undead, waiting, traveling, or they might be set out on their own adventure. Some may even consider you to be an enemy and might attack you. Item discovery is pretty standard for a Souls game. You come across various corpses or objects that contain some sort of item, just like the previous installments of the game. I know this has been mentioned before, but I think it's worth reiterating. Dark Souls 3 does a fantastic job of putting items where they belong. You gather the items or the souls of those who came before you to become stronger and stronger, and along the way, even those who have perished still have a place in this world. Through you. Even the enemies that you slay will drop items to help empower you. Remember earlier when I suggested that the protagonist, you, are the weakest chess piece on the board? Well, you start as a pawn, and then you become a rook, perhaps a bishop, and so on. I suppose the strongest piece of a chessboard is the queen, so we'll just say that you eventually grow strong enough to be just as efficient. There isn't much else to say here. Items are items, and Dark Souls 3 didn't have a crafting system like Bloodborne did, so anything you found is what you used. I do think that most items are pretty mediocre in the long run, which actually allows the player to choose which items are important to them. Perhaps you're into PvP, so you stock up on undead hunter charms. Maybe you like to carry a hefty supply around of ranged weaponry so that you can keep your distance from an enemy. I myself pretty much only stick to healing items or alluring skulls, and the occasional support item for stamina or FP. It just depends on the build and what I need at the time to get through a certain section of the game. Finally, exploration rewards the player with a gorgeous view of the entire world, from damp and dark to poisonous swamps and glorious castles. Lothric is full of everything. Again, this is standard for a Souls game, so Dark Souls 3 definitely checks off on a list of must-haves for level design. The World chapter will dive further into this topic, but I wanted to focus briefly on the cracks and crevices of Lothric. Hoist yourself high above the swamp, and you discover a stray demon who originates from Dark Souls 1. This mini-boss fight is infinitely more difficult than the original, but I love how this particular demon is represented in Dark Souls 3. Not only is he aesthetically different, but he's a familiar face for veteran fans. Descend into the profane capital, home of Yorm, and discover an old friend from Dark Souls 2. The man who loved overpriced ladders, but his demise came near that which he lived for. Within the icy city of Irithyll, you might come across a portrait of Nishandra from Dark Souls 2. Realistically, the major references in Irithyll cater to fans of both the first and second games properly, igniting the sensation of nostalgia. And this one in particular is one of my favorites. I loved Dark Souls 2, so seeing the final boss represented, even if it is cryptic, suggests that she is well known across this kingdom. Perhaps Irithyll in another time was once Drang-like Castle. Fortunately, Dark Souls 3 also has many unique elements that entice the player while exploring. Not all visual awards are nostalgic, some are new and provide the player with optional bosses or zones, and quest lines that accompany them. My favorite optional area is the Consumed King's Garden, and subsequently the Untended Graves. After Osiris, a horrifying boss fight, the player is shown a replica of the Cemetery of Ash. Walking into the starting level once again was always captivating. I remember when I first encountered this zone and I couldn't help but explore every corner to see if I could find something special. Thus, the ending that I usually go for becomes available. Grab the Firekeeper eyes from behind an illusory wall, and the Ashen One is given the option to betray their closest ally in favor of darkness.
Ashen One, are these eyes? How gracious of thee, Ashen One. The very things we Firekeepers have been missing. Ashen One, my thanks for the eyes thou'st given. But Firekeepers are not meant to have eyes. It is forbidden. These will reveal through a sliver of light frightful images of betrayal. A world without fire. Ashen One, is this truly thy wish? Of course. I serve thee, and will do as thou bidst. This will be our private affair. No one else may know of this. Stay thy path. Find lords to link the fire, and I will blindly tend to the flame. Until the day of thy grand betrayal. Farewell, Ashen One. Mayst thou thy peace discover.
I don't think you have any idea how fast I really am. I'm fast as fuck, boy. What the?
So yeah, I actually died to Wolnir on my playthrough here. I decided to put this little montage in to capitalize on the subject of combat by showcasing tight hitboxes, fluidity, and diversity of combat. You'll notice that when I was hit, it was after making a mistake. If I failed to parry, I was punished and even eliminated when I wasn't performing adequately. Blocking, parrying, rolling, dodging. The Dark Souls combat is simple on paper, but complex when you dig deeper into the systems. With so many different builds available among pyromancy, sorcery, faith, dexterity, strength, and even luck, players have a huge variety of elective combat styles. I've only ever done sorcery, pyromancy, dexterity, and strength myself, but I do tend to watch Dark Souls PvP videos in my free time, and some of the other build options are seriously powerful. I know some builds are more catered to PvP, but pretty much everything in this game can be used up until the very end. I do recommend checking out Fighter PL if you don't know who he is already for content like that. Other than that, Dark Souls 3 does not have power stancing such as in Dark Souls 2, but there are dual wield items that have special abilities that come with them. And out of that bunch, the Dancer's Blade are my favorite item. I love how the Dancer's Blade's special ability actually mimics how the boss actually fights you in her fight. You know, the spinning around in circles wildly. It's pretty cool, it's unique. Everything in Dark Souls 3 when it comes to combat feels fluid and manageable, allowing the player to choose between the selection of builds to overcome their encounters. Although the diversity of builds and complexity of combat can be overwhelming, at the end of the day, you and I are both just spamming R1 in hopes that something works. I think that naturally, every playthrough becomes fresh. It's a fresh experience because you can go between all those different builds that I just mentioned, even if you've never done them before, and it's really unique to Dark Souls 3. I mean, Dark Souls 2 and 1 had different builds, but Dark Souls 3 just has so much, and it's definitely worth trying out all kinds of builds. With that being said, there's not much else to talk about when it comes down to combat. It is selective, dependent on enemies and bosses, so no two fights are alike. A token piece of all From Software games, the bosses. Dark Souls 3 boasts 19 bosses and 6 additional throughout the DLC. Each boss has unique mechanics and varying amounts of damage output and health. Each boss is a real boss fight. I mean, I already mentioned it, but the scale of these bosses alone is enough to intimidate any player. Some fights even have a gimmick implemented to simplify a fight while maintaining the sensation of utter grandiosity. The two that come to mind are Wolnir's bracelets and Yorm the Giant with the Storm Ruler. Defeating a boss while enkindled ignites the players so that they can have increased health and the ability to summon other players or NPCs in the form of phantoms. The trade-off to this, of course, is the fact that the player can be invaded by other players for PvP content. This was all recorded during the time period where the servers were down, so I have literally zero PvP footage. Each boss rewards the player with a soul that can be transposed for a greater weapon or spell that grants the player unique abilities. Bosses also mark the end of each level, so a player knows when they've overcome whatever zone they're in. No boss in Dark Souls 3 stinks. I mean that. Each boss is worth fighting multiple times. I would say that each boss is also aesthetically pleasing due to their sharp designs. The same sorts of elements are incorporated into standard enemies across each level. Maybe you fight a knight or a giant crab, from rats to basilisks, dog, to a wide range of undead humanoids. One major criticism with Dark Souls 3 is that so many enemies are easy. I mean, if you can't stun lock the enemy, their health pool might be so low that you just defeat them in a few strikes. Many of the enemies are also humanoids, so they can be parried or lack visual diversity to keep the player engaged. Enemies, even repurposed enemies, will grow in power with you as you progress through the levels. By defeating each enemy, the player is rewarded with souls to make purchases and level up their character in order to grow in strength. With each kill, the player makes progress towards the very end and final boss of the series. Music has always been a major strength of From Software. The pooling sounds of lighthearted, warm and relaxing, to the glorious music accompanying boss battles always bring the player into the universe. While wandering the world, you'll only hear the manifestation of sounds coming from your boots and armor, or the howls of enemies. But boss fights actively build their soundtrack to increase tension during a battle. Vort's theme is iconic. The first fight that you come across outside of Gundyr, and it feels glorious. The great thing about each theme is that each theme complements their battle and arena, so Vort's theme might not fit well with Pontiff and his arena, or Yorm's arena, as an example, and so on. Each theme is immediately recognizable to a seasoned player. Outside of boss fights, the only other area in Dark Souls 3 that has some form of music is the Firelink Shrine. The shrine hosts two main scores, starting with the original song, and the unlockable track, which has a much more somber tone, referencing the story and how it's coming to a dark closing. In terms of the setting, From Software has brilliant graphical design. The immense detail from the enemy design to weapons and armor, and each little detail throughout the levels. Lothric is full of clutter. One thing I always appreciate about the Dark Souls series as a whole is that it isn't afraid to become more mature with the present elements. You can come across hanging bodies strewn about the undead settlement, or explore decrepit graves throughout the catacombs. The enemy visuals are also representative of this, considering some of the rather creepy designs. With that being said, the hulking castles and more bright lands of Irithyll and Lothric Castle are great in between zones that aren't so depressing. They also have enemies to complement their territories with knights and more royal-looking characters. You're able to feel the sense of dread in some areas, while others bring you hope and joy. There are four endings to tie the soul's story in a neat little bow. The link to the first flame, usurpation of fire, unkindled, and the end of fire. Maintain the world as it is and link the flame. You've been battling your whole way to this very ending. By linking the first flame, you've completed the goal that you set out to do from the very beginning. The story has implied that you've done this once before, and now you've done it again. A Lord of Cinder, culminating your adventure by claiming your throne. However, the fire burns slowly, and as the ash rests beneath you, you realize that the world simply cannot go on any longer. Usurp the fire, and as the Lord of Hollows, leave the kiln to lead your army of dead to control the world. All this time, the undead have suffered, and you have brought an opportunity for the undead to rise. You do this by stealing the flame for yourself. Instead of burning when touching the flame, your dark sigils that you've accumulated over the course of your journey consume the flame entirely. You become the embodiment of flame and darkness. Themes that have made their way throughout the entire series. This questline even references both Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. It is implied that from this point forward, the Hollows move on to rule the world so that an age without gods may come along. Mankind is free of their shackles. By committing to the unkindled ending, slaying the Firekeeper before bringing the Age of Darkness, the nameless, accursed undead exemplifies his or her greed by taking the first flame for themselves. You kill the only woman who had shown so much care throughout this journey, all for your own gain. Because you inherit the first flame all for yourself, perhaps you go on to destroy the world with the power you've gained. This ending is more cryptic as there is no true answer to what actually happens here. You don't even get an achievement for completing the game this way.
The first flame quickly fades. Darkness will shortly settle.
The only way to end the Age of Fire is by visiting the Firelink Shrine from another time. In an age of darkness, all things are less than desirable.
But one day,
However, by finding the eyes of a past or future Firekeeper, you are able to show the present Firekeeper a world without flame. You signal to her that you believe the Age of Fire should be complete, so that all things can be reset one final time. All cinder should come to an end. As the screen fades and everything goes quiet, you hear the words,
Ashen One, hearest thou my voice still?
If you've made it this far, then I want to say how much I appreciate you taking the time to listen. It's probably obvious, but I wanted to rush out this video before the release of Elden Ring, and that's been difficult to do with a full-time job out in the real world. Because of that, I do apologize for the rust sections here at the end. I just wanted to get this video going. I've spent many hours wide awake when I should be sleeping in order to make this video, and I've spent hours going through my clips, recording, playing. It's been a fantastic adventure. And it's certainly not the last one. Dark Souls 3 will always hold a special place in my heart, and I hope that this video encapsulates that. From the point of recording this very voiceover, we are just a few days away. Let's see, tomorrow will be Tuesday, so we're looking at like 3 days till Elden Ring, and I can't be more excited. As I mentioned earlier on in this video at the very beginning, I will be covering that by just playing the game, recording it, editing, blah blah blah. And so if you really do want to check that out and you liked this video, then go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me.
I grew up in a place where they told you what to chase, told you how to run the race. Every move was on the page, but I didn't like their way. Had to fight and misbehave, had to find a way to change, had to leave to find my way. Caught up in a daydream, I beat my mind up there almost daily. It's how I pass time, no opinions safely. It's how I understand what I want in this place, see. Cause everybody wanna tell you bad things, what could go wrong, what fame brings. But success is a finicky thing, and if you ain't sure, no, it'll never be. And I don't wanna let myself